My name is Audrey, and I'm 29. For 3 years, I poured my soul into my job, staying late, skipping lunches, believing hard work would earn me respect. Then one email shattered that. My coworker Jocelyn, who barely showed up, got the promotion I'd bled for. My boss Raymond's betrayal cut deep, leaving me questioning everything. I sat at my desk, clutching my notebook of ideas now worthless. Have you ever been blindsided by unfairness at work? Share where you're watching from, and if this hits home, please like and subscribe. The break room smelled of burnt coffee and stale bagels. I stood by the counter, stirring cream into my mug, trying to shake off the email from yesterday. Jocelyn's promotion still burned in my chest, but I told myself to focus, to keep moving. The office buzzed with whispers, and I caught snippets of her name as coworkers huddled near the vending machine. Their glances darted my way, then away, like I was a ghost they didn't want to acknowledge. My grip tightened on the mug. I'd spent the morning replaying every late night I'd clocked, every project I'd carried across the finish line. 3 years of proving myself, and for what? To watch someone who coasted on charm leapfrog over me. I wanted to scream, but instead I sipped my coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me. I wasn't ready to face the pity in their eyes, but I couldn't hide forever. Hannah slipped into the room, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She was my closest friend here, the one who'd laughed with me over takeout during crunch times. Her curly hair was pulled back, and her eyes avoided mine as she grabbed a water bottle from the fridge. I waited, hoping she'd say something, anything to make this feel less raw. But she just fiddled with the cap, her silence louder than the chatter around us. I couldn't take it. You heard about Jocelyn, right? My voice came out sharper than I meant, cutting through the hum of the room. Heads turned, then quickly looked away. Hannah froze, her fingers still on the bottle. Yeah, she said, barely above a whisper. I heard. She glanced at the door like she wanted to bolt. My stomach twisted. Hannah wasn't just quiet. She was hiding something. Did you know? I pressed, stepping closer. The mug was warm in my hands, a small anchor against the unease creeping up my spine. Before the email, I mean. Did you know they were picking her? Her eyes flicked to mine, then dropped to the floor. Audrey, it's not like that. Her voice wavered and she twisted the bottle cap harder. I overheard Raymond talking to HR last week. It was already decided. I didn't think it was my place to tell you. My breath caught. Last week she'd known for days and said nothing. We'd sat together at lunch, joking about weekend plans while she carried this secret. I thought of all the times I'd trusted her, shared my frustrations, my dreams for that promotion. I'd even helped her prep for her own review, staying late to proofread her slides. And she'd let me walk into this blind. Why didn't you warn me? I asked, my voice low, trembling. The break room felt smaller, the walls closing in. A couple of coworkers slipped out, leaving their half-eaten donuts behind. I didn't care who heard anymore. Hannah's cheeks flushed. I didn't want to stress you out. You were already working so hard. I thought maybe it'd change, or... She trailed off, her excuse crumbling under my stare. I'm sorry. Okay, I should have said something. Sorry didn't fix it. I turned away, setting my mug on the counter with a clink. My eyes landed on a photo pinned to the bulletin board, a snapshot from last year's team retreat. Jocelyn and I stood shoulder to shoulder, grinning under a string of fairy lights. I'd spent that weekend teaching her how to use the company's project software patient, even when she zoned out. She'd hugged me at the end, calling me her work savior. Now that memory felt like a slap. I thought of the hours I'd spent mentoring her, walking her through reports she barely read. She'd lean on my desk, all smiles, asking for just one more favor. I'd done it gladly, thinking we were a team. But she'd taken my work, my ideas, and paraded them as her own. And Hannah had watched it happen, keeping her mouth shut. You could have told me, I said, turning back to Hannah. My voice was steady now, but inside I was unraveling. I deserved to know. She nodded, her eyes glassy. I know. I messed up. She reached out, then stopped, her hand hovering in the air. Can we talk later? Please, I didn't answer. I grabbed my mug and walked out, the whispers trailing me like smoke. The hallway stretched long and empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My desk waited at the end, piled with folders I'd organized for a project Jocelyn now claimed. I sank into my chair, my hands shaking as I opened my laptop. An email from Raymond popped up scheduling a one-on-one for tomorrow. Performance discussion, it read. My heart sank deeper. Was this about the promotion or something worse? I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Jocelyn's laugh echoed from the conference room down the hall, carefree and sharp. I'd trusted this place, these people, but now I felt like a fool. The truth was sinking in. I wasn't just overlooked. I was invisible. The next morning, I walked into Raymond's office, my palms sweaty despite the air conditioning. His desk was cluttered with papers, a stark contrast to the polished wood I'd imagined when I first started here, dreaming of meetings like this. I'd spent the night rehearsing what to say. Pacing my apartment, my sister Leslie's voice echoing in my head. Don't let them walk over you, Audrey. But now standing here, my courage felt thin like a thread about to snap. Raymond barely looked up from his laptop. Sit, he said, his tone clipped like I was an interruption. I settled into the stiff chair across from him, my hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. The framed quote on his desk caught my eye. Loyalty builds success. It mocked me, a reminder of every overtime hour I'd given this place, every client I'd won over with late-night revisions. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. I wanted to talk about the promotion I started. I've been here 3 years, Raymond. I've led projects, trained the team, brought in new accounts. I thought I was in line for it. He leaned back, his chair creaking, and finally met my eyes. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, annoyance maybe? Audrey Jocelyn has a certain presence. She's got that leadership charisma we need right now. He waved a hand like my work was a minor detail. She's been stepping up in ways you might not see. Stepping up, I bit my lip, tasting the metallic tang of restraint. Jocelyn, who left early for personal errands and forgot deadlines. Until I reminded her, I thought of the client pitch I'd crafted last month, the one she'd presented with her name slapped on it. My voice tightened, but I pushed forward, listing my contributions. The revenue I'd driven, the systems I'd streamlined, the team morale I'd boosted. Each word felt like a plea, a demand to be seen. Raymond cut me off, his hand raised like a stop sign. Look, I get it. You're dedicated. But promotions aren't just about numbers. It's about fit. Jocelyn fits the vision. You're great at what you do, keep doing it. Be a team player and opportunities will come. A team player. The words landed like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. I'd been nothing but a team player, carrying Jocelyn's weight, staying late so others could leave early. I wanted to argue, to demand he explain what vision meant, but his phone buzzed and he glanced at it, already half dismissing me. Anything else, he asked, his tone final. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked out the door, clicking shut behind me. The hallway was a blur. Voices muffled as I passed the conference room. Through the glass, I saw Jocelyn leaning against a table, laughing with another manager, her hair tossed back like she owned the place. Her ease, her confidence, it twisted something deep inside me. She hadn't earned this, not the way I had. Back at my desk, I sank into my chair, the weight of Raymond's words pressing down. Be a team player. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a command to stay in my place, to keep grinding while others coasted. I opened a spreadsheet, trying to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to the photo on my monitor, a group shot from my first day here. I was in the back, smiling, naive, thinking hard work would be enough. Now that smile felt like a stranger's. A notification pinged. An email from HR confirming Jocelyn's new role and outlining her expanded responsibilities. My name wasn't mentioned, not even as a contributor to the projects she'd inherit. I stared at the screen, my pulse loud in my ears. This wasn't just about one promotion anymore. It was about being erased piece by piece until I was nothing but a shadow in their success. I closed the email and leaned back, my hands trembling. Jocelyn's laughter still echoed in my mind, mixing with Raymond's casual dismissal. Something was shifting inside me, a quiet rage I hadn't let myself feel before. I wasn't invisible, not yet. But if I stayed silent, I might become just that. The team meeting room was too warm, the air thick with the hum of the projector, and the faint scent of whiteboard markers. I sat near the back, my notebook open, but untouched, my pen gripped so tightly my knuckles ached. It had been a week since my talk with Raymond, and his words, "be a team player," still gnawed at me. I'd come to this meeting hoping to bury my frustration to prove I could keep going. But when Jocelyn walked in, her new title practically glowing around her, I knew I'd been fooling myself. She took the head of the table, her smile sharp, and practiced like she'd been born for this. Raymond sat beside her, nodding as she flipped through her slides. My slides. The project proposal I'd spent months perfecting, the one I'd pitched in a late-night email to her when she begged for something to show the boss. Now she was presenting it as hers, her voice smooth as she outlined my ideas, my timelines, my budget breakdowns, even my phrasing about streamlining client workflows. I recognized every word, and each one felt like a theft. I glanced around the table, searching for a flicker of recognition from the team. Hannah stared at her laptop, her fingers frozen on the keys. The others scribbled notes or nodded along, oblivious or unwilling to question it. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and disbelief. How could they not see this? I'd shared drafts of this proposal in team huddles, asked for feedback, credited everyone's input. But now Jocelyn stood there, basking in applause for work she hadn't touched. She clicked to the next slide, and my stomach dropped. It was the risk analysis I'd agonized over, the one I'd revised 3 times to get right. "This was a tough one," she said, chuckling like it was a casual aside. "But I think we nailed it. We." The lie was so blatant it burned. I shifted in my seat, my pulse hammering. I wanted to stay quiet, to swallow the injustice like I always had, but something snapped. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the room louder than I'd planned. Heads turned and Jocelyn's smile faltered for a split second. That risk analysis was mine. I built it from scratch. You asked me for it last month, remember? The room went still. Hannah's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Jocelyn tilted her head, her expression a mix of pity and control. "Audrey, I appreciate your input," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But this was a team effort. I incorporated everyone's ideas, including yours. Let's not get hung up on details." Details. My work. My sleepless nights reduced to a footnote in her story. I opened my mouth to argue, but Raymond cleared his throat, his gaze hard. "Audrey, let's keep this productive. Jocelyn's leading this project now. If you have concerns, we can discuss them privately." Privately. Like my talk with him last week where he'd brushed me off. The dismissal stung worse this time, public and deliberate. I felt the team's eyes on me, some curious, some uncomfortable, but none supportive. I sank back in my chair, my face hot, my notebook blurring in front of me. Jocelyn resumed her presentation, her voice brighter as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted in me, a quiet fury taking root. As the meeting dragged on, she announced new assignments. "Audrey, you'll take on the data entry for this phase," she said, not even looking at me. Data entry. The grunt work she used to dodge now dumped on me like a punishment. A few coworkers exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. Raymond nodded, scribbling something in his planner already checked out. I stared at the table, my mind racing. This wasn't just about one stolen project. It was about being pushed down, made small, while Jocelyn climbed on my back. I thought of the brainstorming session where I'd handed her my notes, her grateful smile as she promised to polish them. She hadn't polished anything, she'd claimed them word for word. And Raymond, my boss, the man I'd trusted to see my worth, was letting it happen. The meeting ended and people filed out their chatter, resuming like nothing was wrong. I stayed seated, my hands trembling as I closed my notebook. Jocelyn lingered by the projector, laughing with Raymond about some inside joke. Her ease, her power, it was unbearable. I'd spent years building this team's success, and now I was being erased one task at a time. I left the meeting room and headed straight for my apartment, my bag slung over my shoulder, heavy with the weight of unsaid words. The drive home was a blur, stoplights and honking horns fading into the background as Jocelyn's smirk and Raymond's cold stare replayed in my mind. I parked crookedly in my spot, too drained to care, and climbed the stairs to my place. The door clicked shut behind me, and the silence of my living room felt like a trap. I dropped my bag on the couch and sank onto the floor, my back against the coffee table. My phone buzzed, and I ignored it until it buzzed again. A text from Leslie. "How'd the meeting go? You okay?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to tell her everything: how Jocelyn had stolen my work, how Raymond had silenced me, how the team had watched it happen. But the words wouldn't come. Typing it out would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I tossed the phone aside and pulled a box of old files from under the table. Somewhere in there was my first performance review, the one Raymond had signed 2 years ago. I dug through papers until I found it, the pages creased but intact. "Audrey exceeds expectations," it read. "A key asset to the team." I traced the words with my finger, my chest aching. Had it all been a lie? Had he ever meant it? Or was I just a cog in his machine, easy to replace? The praise felt hollow now, a cruel contrast to today's humiliation. I'd built my life around this job, tied my worth to every deadline, met every client impressed. And for what? To be handed data entry tasks while Jocelyn waltzed into a role I'd earned. I shoved the review back into the box, my hands shaking. The unfairness was suffocating, a weight I couldn't shake. My phone lit up again, this time with an email. The subject line stopped me cold. "Urgent report revision." It was from Jocelyn, sent at 9 p.m., as if she knew I'd be awake stewing. "Audrey, the client, report you submitted last week needs major edits. Please revise and return by 8 a.m. tomorrow. Details attached." I opened the attachment, my jaw tightening. The report was one she'd barely glanced at when I'd asked for her input. Now her edits were a laundry list of nitpicks, font sizes, wording tweaks, things she'd never cared about before. It wasn't about quality. It was about control. I stood and paced the room, my socks scuffing against the rug. I thought of calling Leslie, letting her fire me up to quit right then and there. She'd been pushing me to walk away ever since I told her about the promotion, her voice fierce over the phone. "You're worth more than this, Audrey." But quitting wasn't simple. I had rent bills, a car payment. This job, as brutal as it was, kept me afloat. Walking away meant risking everything, and the thought made my stomach lurch. I stopped by the window, staring at the streetlights below. Leslie's story came back to me unbidden. She'd worked at a retail chain years ago, pouring herself into it only to be passed over for a manager role. Her boss had favored a friend, someone who barely showed up on time. She'd quit on the spot, no safety net, and rebuilt her life from scratch. It hurt, she'd told me once, her eyes steady. But staying would have hurt more. I envied her courage, but I wasn't her. Not yet. The email from Jocelyn glowed on my phone, a taunt. I could picture her typing it smug, knowing I'd comply because I always did. I'd fixed her mistakes, covered her absences, all while she climbed higher. And Raymond, with his talk of team players, had enabled every step. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, a knife twisted by people I'd trusted. I sat back down, my head in my hands. The clock on the wall ticked past 10 each second, a reminder of the report waiting, the morning looming. I could do it. Churn out the revisions, keep my head down. But the thought made me sick. Every keystroke would be another piece of me handed over, another surrender. I looked at the box of files, the review still peeking out. That Audrey, the one who believed in fairness and hard work, felt so far away, and I didn't know how to get her back. The conference room was packed, every seat taken for the company-wide presentation. I sat in the third row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the hum of anticipation buzzing around me. Today was supposed to be a milestone. My project, the one I'd poured months into, was being showcased to the board, clients, and every department. But as Jocelyn stood at the front, clicking through slides with my work plastered across them, my pride curdled into something sharp and bitter. She was stealing my moment, and I was expected to sit quietly and clap. She wore a tailored blazer, her voice confident as she walked the room through the project's goals. But her details were off, timelines, muddled budget figures swapped. I shifted in my seat, my nails digging into my palms. I'd spent weeks triple-checking those numbers, anticipating every question. Now she was fumbling through my vision, and the room was nodding along, blind to her errors. My heart pounded, a mix of fury and disbelief. This wasn't just unfair, it was a violation. I glanced at Raymond, seated near the podium. He leaned forward, jotting notes, his face a mask of approval. The sight twisted something deep inside me. He knew this was my work. I'd sent him the drafts, sat in his office explaining every phase. Yet here he was, letting Jocelyn take the spotlight, her mistakes piling up with every slide. A client in the front row, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit, frowned and whispered to her colleague. My pulse quickened. She saw it too. The gaps, the inconsistencies. Jocelyn clicked to the next slide, a chart I'd designed to highlight risk mitigation. This was a key innovation, she said, her smile wide. It really sets us apart. My innovation. My late nights running scenarios. My charts she'd barely glanced at when I'd emailed them. The room murmured, impressed, and my restraint snapped. I couldn't sit here letting her rewrite my legacy. I stood my chair, scraping against the floor. The room turned, dozens of eyes on me. Jocelyn paused, her hand frozen on the clicker. Sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. But that chart is mine. I created it along with most of this project. Jocelyn, you didn't even review the drafts I sent you. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Hannah, sitting 2 rows back, covered her mouth, her eyes wide. The client in the navy suit leaned forward, her pen still. Jocelyn's face flushed, but she recovered quickly, laughing softly. Audrey, I know you're passionate about this, but this was a collaborative effort. I led the integration of all contributions, including yours. Led. She hadn't led anything. I opened my mouth to counter, but Raymond stood, his voice booming. Audrey, that's enough. This is not the time or place. You're undermining leadership, and it's unprofessional. Sit down. Unprofessional. The word hit like a slap, public and final. My face burned, my legs trembling as I stood there exposed. The room was silent, the air heavy with awkwardness. Colleagues looked away, some fidgeting with their notebooks, others staring at the floor. Hannah's gaze met mine for a fleeting second, her lips parting as if to speak, but she dropped her eyes, silent. The client raised an eyebrow, scribbling something, but no one else moved. I wanted to scream, to lay out every stolen idea, every late night I'd given. I wanted to tell them about the emails, the drafts, the truth. But Raymond's stare pinned me in place, his authority a wall I couldn't breach. Jocelyn resumed her presentation, her voice smoother now, as if my outburst was a minor hiccup. The room followed her lead, their attention shifting back to the screen. I sank into my chair, my hands shaking so hard I had to clasp them together. The client's frown lingered in my mind, a small spark of validation, but it wasn't enough. I'd spoken up, laid my truth bare, and it had changed nothing. Worse, it had painted a target on me. Raymond's words echoed unprofessional, undermining. I wasn't just invisible now. I was a problem, a disruption to their perfect narrative. The presentation ended with polite applause, but I barely heard it. My ears rang, my body numb as I stumbled out of the conference room, the weight of Raymond's rebuke crushing me. I made it to the parking lot, collapsing into my car, the leather seat cold against my skin. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there staring at the dashboard, replaying the moment I'd stood up only to be cut down in front of everyone. My truth hadn't mattered. My phone buzzed in my bag, snapping me back. It was a text from Leslie, "Call me. Now." I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I dialed. Her voice came through urgent. "Audrey, what happened? Hannah just texted me. She said you called out Jocelyn in front of the whole company. Are you okay, Hannah?" The name stung. She'd watched me drown in that room and said nothing, yet she had the nerve to text my sister. I swallowed, my throat raw. "I'm not okay," I said, my voice cracking. I told the truth, Leslie. I told them the project was mine. And Raymond, he called me unprofessional, told me to sit down like I was a child. Leslie's silence was heavy, then she spoke, her tone fierce. That's bullshit. You need to get out of there, Audrey. They don't deserve you. Her words were meant to lift me, but they only deepened the ache. Leaving wasn't an option, not yet. I had bills, a lease, a life tethered to this job. But staying felt like surrendering my soul. I hung up, promising to call her later, and drove home, the city lights blurring through my tears. My apartment was dark when I walked in, the quiet oppressive. I kicked off my shoes and sank onto the couch, my work bag spilling papers across the floor. One sheet caught my eye, a printed email from months ago, me thanking Jocelyn for feedback on a draft. Feedback she'd never given. I'd been so eager to please, so blind. I stood and paced, my bare feet cold against the hardwood. My mind churned, piecing together fragments I'd ignored. Late-night emails from Raymond praising Jocelyn's potential. Her cozy lunches with him, always excused as strategy sessions. And then a memory hit me, sharp and sickening. Last year, I'd overheard a vendor mention Jocelyn's uncle, a supplier for our company. I'd thought nothing of it then, but now it clicked. Raymond's favoritism wasn't just laziness or bias. It was a deal, a quiet exchange of favors, and I'd been collateral damage. My hands shook as I grabbed my laptop, opening a blank document. I started typing the words, spilling out every slight, every stolen credit, every moment I'd been pushed aside. It was more than a resignation letter. It was a reckoning. I wrote about the project, the lies, the vendor connection I'd pieced together. My fingers flew, fueled by a rage I hadn't let myself feel until now. The last line was a gut punch, a truth I knew would shake Raymond to his core. Your unethical vendor deal with Jocelyn's family will come to light. I've made sure of it. I stopped my breath. Ragged, staring at the screen. The words were real now, permanent. I'd crossed a line, exposing not just my pain, but a secret that could unravel everything. Fear crept in. What if I was wrong? What if this destroyed me instead? But the thought of staying silent, of letting them erase me, was worse. I saved the document and closed my laptop, my heart pounding. I curled up on the couch, the darkness pressing in. Leslie's text glowed on my phone, unanswered. The world I'd built at that company, my trust, my effort, my hope, had collapsed in one brutal moment. I was alone, raw, with nothing left to lose, and that terrified me more than anything. The morning sun cut through my office blinds, casting thin stripes across Raymond's desk. I stood in front of him, my resignation letter clutched in one hand, my heart a steady drumbeat. Last night's tears had dried, leaving a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The letter, with its final line exposing his vendor deal with Jocelyn's uncle, was my anchor. I'd spent the dawn rereading it, each word a brick in the wall I was building against my fear. This was my moment. Raymond leaned back in his chair, HK's coffee mug steaming beside a stack of reports. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Audrey, what's this about?" he asked, gesturing to the letter. His voice was light, like he expected a complaint he could brush off. I took a breath, my fingers tightening on the paper, and slid it across his desk. "I'm resigning," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Effective immediately." His lips twitched into a smirk, and he let out a short laugh, the kind you'd give a kid throwing a tantrum. "Come on, Audrey. You're upset about the presentation, I get it. But quitting? You don't mean that." He picked up the letter, skimming the first page with a casual flick of his wrist. "Let's talk this through. You're too valuable to just walk away." Valuable. The word twisted in my gut, a hollow echo of the praise he'd once fed me. I thought of the conference room, his voice calling me unprofessional, the room's silence as I sank under his words. Valuable, but only when I stayed in line. I held his gaze, refusing to waver. "I mean it," I said. "I'm done." His smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease. He flipped to the second page, his eyes scanning faster now. I watched his face, waiting for the moment I'd imagined all night. His brows furrowed. Then his jaw tightened as he reached the last line. Your unethical vendor deal with Jocelyn's family will come to light. I've made sure of it. His hand froze the paper, crinkling under his grip. He looked up, his face pale, his voice low and strained. Is this a joke? I nodded, slow and deliberate, my pulse steady. No joke, Raymond. You made your choice when you let Jocelyn take my work. Now I'm making mine. The words felt like a release, each one peeling away the weight of months spent swallowing my anger. His eyes darted back to the letter, rereading as if he could will the words to change. But they wouldn't. I'd sent a copy to a friend at a local business journal, anonymous, but detailed with enough evidence to spark questions. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. He set the letter down, his hands trembling slightly. Audrey, you don't know what you're doing. This could ruin everything. For you, for the company. His voice cracked a mix of panic and plea. I almost felt sorry for him, but then I remembered his smirk, his dismissal, the way he'd built his success on my silence. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, stepping back. I reached into my bag and pulled out my project notebook, the one filled with my ideas, my late-night sketches, my dreams for this place. I set it on his desk, a final offering not for him, but for the part of me that had believed in this job. You won't need this anymore. I don't either. I turned and walked out my steps, measured the click of my heels echoing in the quiet office. His door stayed open behind me, but he didn't call out. The hallway stretched long and empty, my coworkers' desks still dark this early. For the first time in months, I felt light, like I'd shed a skin that no longer fit. I'd taken the first step, and there was no going back. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, a warm contrast to the cold resolve I'd carried from Raymond's office. I sat in a corner booth, my hands wrapped around a mug, waiting for Hannah and Marcus. My resignation letter was still fresh, its final line a bomb I'd detonated hours ago. Walking out had felt like breaking chains, but now in the quiet hum of this place, I needed allies to turn my spark into something real. Hannah arrived first, her coat damp from the morning drizzle. She slid into the booth, her eyes searching mine, guilt written across her face. Audrey. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice low. I froze in that presentation. I should have backed you up. Her apology hung between us, raw and overdue. I wanted to be angry, to remind her of the silence that had cut me deepest, but I saw the weight she carried, her own fears, her own battles in this broken system. It's done, I said, softer than I'd planned. But I need you now, Hannah. I'm not letting them get away with this. Her eyes widened, and she nodded, a flicker of determination replacing her shame. I leaned forward, my voice steady. I mentioned Raymond's vendor deal in my letter. It's with Jocelyn's uncle. I sent details to a journalist. If we speak out, we can make sure the truth sticks. She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. That's big, Audrey. If we do this, there's no going back. I nodded, knowing the risk. But staying silent had cost me too much already. Hannah took a breath and met my gaze. I'm in. I've seen how Raymond plays favorites. I've got emails too, stuff he didn't think I'd keep. Before I could respond, Marcus walked in, his leather jacket scuffed but his stride confident. He'd left the company a year ago, fed up with the same games I was now fighting. We'd stayed in touch, swapping stories over occasional beers. He dropped into the booth, his grin sharp. Heard you shook things up, Audrey. About time someone did. I filled him in, my words, careful but unflinching. Jocelyn's theft, Raymond's cover-up, the vendor deal I'd uncovered. Marcus listened, his jaw tightening. When I finished, he leaned back, his eyes glinting with something like pride. You're not messing around. Good. I've got something you'll want to see. He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder of old emails, Raymond approving inflated vendor contracts, some tied to Jocelyn's uncle. I kept these when I left. Insurance, you know. My heart raced. This was more than I'd hoped for, proof that could bury Raymond's excuses. I looked at Hannah, then Marcus, their faces lit with the same fire I felt. We need to be smart, I said. I've got a lawyer friend Marcus knows. She can guide us. Keep this anonymous but airtight. We're not just exposing them, we're protecting anyone else they'd screw over. Hannah nodded, her hands steadier now. I'll dig up what I have. Meeting notes, anything that shows how they sidelined you. Marcus tapped his phone. I'll send you these files tonight. Get your lawyer on it. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone. Their support felt like solid ground under my feet, a foundation I could build on. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the rules that had kept me small. I thought of the notebook I'd left on Raymond's desk, a symbol of the work I'd given them. Now I was taking back my power not just for me, but for every person who'd been overlooked, used, discarded. The thought steadied me, a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. As we planned, the coffee shop buzzed around us. Baristas calling orders, customers chatting. But our booth felt like a war room, each word a step toward justice. I glanced at the window, catching my reflection in the glass. My eyes were tired, but clear, no longer pleading for approval. I set my mug down, the clink soft but final, and looked at Hannah and Marcus. We were ready. A week had passed since I walked out of Raymond's office, and my apartment felt different now, like the air itself held its breath. I sat at my kitchen table, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in front of me, my laptop open to a news site. The headline was small, buried in the business section, but it hit me like a shout. Local firm faces probe over vendor contracts. My anonymous tip had landed, and the board was digging into Raymond's deals. My hands shook as I scrolled, the words blurring. This was real. I'd expected to feel triumph, but instead a quiet unease settled in. The article didn't name me just a whistleblower, but I knew the ripples would reach me eventually. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. The silence of my apartment was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. I'd set something in motion, and there was no pulling it back. My phone rang, the screen flashing Raymond's name. I stared at it, my heart thudding. I hadn't spoken to him since I'd handed him my letter, since his face had gone pale at my final words. I let it ring twice more before answering, my voice steady but guarded. What do you want, Raymond? Audrey, he said, his tone clipped, almost desperate. We need to talk. This investigation, it's out of control. You know something about it, don't you? He paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. But I didn't. Look, I'm sorry. Things got heated. Come back. We'll work it out. A raise, a new role, whatever you want. Just help me fix this. His offer hung there, tempting in its simplicity. A raise, a title, a way to slide back into the life I'd known. But the thought made my stomach turn. I pictured his office, the framed quote about loyalty, the way he'd dismissed me in front of everyone. He wasn't sorry, he was scared. There's nothing to fix, I said, my voice low. You made your choices, Raymond. Live with them. I hung up before he could respond, my pulse loud in my ears. The phone felt hot in my hand, like it carried his panic. I set it down and stood pacing the small kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tiles. I'd wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, and now he did. But the victory was hollow. I'd burned bridges, risked my reputation, and for what? A headline. A moment of justice that felt more like ashes than fire. Another notification pinged, an internal company memo forwarded by Hannah. I opened it, my breath catching. Jocelyn had been demoted, stripped of her shiny new title after the board questioned her project contributions. The memo was dry corporate, but I could imagine her face, the smug smile gone, replaced by shock. She'd built her rise on my work, and now the cracks were showing. I waited for satisfaction to hit, but all I felt was a dull ache. Her fall didn't undo my pain. I sank back into my chair, staring at the cereal now soggy and untouched. Hannah's email included a note. You did this, Audrey. It's working. Her words were meant to lift me, but they landed like stones. Yes, it was working, the investigation, the demotion, the truth clawing its way out. But at what cost? I'd burned bridges, risked my reputation, and for what? A headline. A moment of justice that felt more like ashes than fire. The doorbell buzzed, startling me. I opened it to find a delivery, a small package with no return address. Inside was a cheap keychain, the kind you'd get at a gas station, shaped like a star. A note was tucked beneath it, unsigned, "You're not invisible." My throat tightened. Hannah, maybe? Or Marcus? Someone who knew what this fight had cost me. I held the keychain, its edges sharp, against my palm, and felt the weight of their belief in me. But it wasn't enough to fill the void where my certainty used to be. I set the keychain on the table next to my phone, now silent. The news article. Raymond's call, Jocelyn's demotion, they were pieces of a puzzle I'd started but couldn't control. I'd wanted to be seen to matter, but now I stood in the aftermath alone with the consequences. The truth was out, but it hadn't set me free. Not yet. The glass doors of the rival company's office gleamed under the afternoon sun, their polished surface reflecting a version of me I barely recognized. I adjusted my blazer, my portfolio tucked under my arm, and stepped inside. The lobby was sleek, all marble and soft lighting, a far cry from the fluorescent hum of my old workplace. I was here for an interview, a chance to start over thanks to the client from that disastrous presentation. Her recommendation had come out of nowhere, a lifeline I hadn't expected. The receptionist smiled, directing me to a waiting area with plush chairs. I sat smoothing my skirt, my nerves buzzing. This was my first real step forward since quitting, and the weight of it pressed against my chest. I'd spent the morning prepping, rehearsing answers, but now doubt crept in. What if I wasn't enough? What if my past followed me, a shadow I couldn't shake? My phone vibrated in my purse, a text from Leslie. "You've got this. Show them who you are." I exhaled her words, a small anchor. She'd been my rock all week, checking in, pushing me to keep moving. Last night over pizza at her place, she'd held my hand as I admitted how scared I was to start over. "You're not starting from zero," she'd said, her eyes fierce. "You're starting from strength." I clung to that now, letting it steady me. The interviewer, a woman named Carla, called my name. She was tall, her handshake firm, her smile professional, but warm. We walked to a glass-walled office, and I settled into a chair, my portfolio open on the table. "I heard about your work," she said, glancing at my resume. "The client you presented to last month was impressed despite the circumstances." Her tone was careful, but I caught the subtext. She knew about the presentation, maybe even the fallout. I nodded, my throat tight. "It was a tough day," I said, choosing my words. "But that project was mine. I built it from the ground up, and I'm proud of what it achieved." My voice was steady, and I surprised myself with how true it felt. For months, I'd let Jocelyn's theft and Raymond's dismissal define me. But here in this clean, quiet room, I was reclaiming my story. Carla leaned forward, her pen tapping lightly. "Tell me about it. Walk me through your process." I did, diving into the project's challenges, my late-night research, the solutions I'd crafted. My hands moved as I spoke, tracing ideas in the air, the passion I'd buried coming alive. I shared new concepts, ones I'd jotted down since quitting, free from the constraints of my old team. Carla's eyes lit up, her notes filling the page. The interview stretched past an hour, questions turning into a conversation. I left with a handshake and a promise to hear back soon, my steps lighter as I crossed the lobby. Outside, the air was crisp, the city humming around me. I stood on the sidewalk, my portfolio still warm against my side, and let myself breathe. I'd done more than answer questions, I'd shown who I was unapologetically. For the first time in weeks, I felt like me again. I texted Leslie. "Nailed it. Thanks for the push." Her reply came fast. "Told you. Dinner tonight to celebrate." I smiled, typing back a yes. But as I slipped my phone into my purse, a shadow crossed my mind. The investigation was still unfolding, Raymond's world, unraveling, Jocelyn's demotion, just the start. I'd won this moment, but the bigger fight loomed, its outcome uncertain. I started walking, the city's pulse matching my own, and let the thought settle. I'd face it when it came. The park near my new workplace was quiet on Saturday mornings, the kind of quiet that felt like a gift. I sat on a wooden bench, my journal open in my lap, a breeze rustling the pages. The trees were turning their leaves a mix of green and gold, and the air carried a hint of autumn, crisp and clean. I'd come here to think, to untangle the weeks since I'd left my old job. My pen moved slowly, words forming in careful loops, each one a step toward understanding who I'd become. I wrote about the investigation now, a distant hum in the news. Marcus had called yesterday, his voice steady with updates the board was tightening oversight, and Raymond's name was barely mentioned anymore. I'd nodded through the call, grateful but detached. That fight felt like another life won where I'd been raw clawing for justice. Now sitting here, I was searching for something softer, forgiveness maybe, or just peace. I thought of Hannah, how she'd carried her own guilt for staying silent. I'd seen her last week at a deli, her smile tentative as we hugged. "I'm trying to be braver," she'd said, her eyes earnest. I'd told her I understood and I meant it. We'd both been caught in that company's gears, each of us surviving the only way we knew how. Letting go of my anger felt like setting down a heavy bag, one I'd carried too long. My journal filled with fragments, memories of my first day at the new job. The way my desk felt like a fresh start. I wrote about the intern I'd mentored, her shy questions, reminding me of my younger self. Helping her had stirred something, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding my trust in what I could offer the world. A jogger passed, her sneakers crunching on the gravel path. I looked up, my eyes catching the shimmer of a pond nearby, its surface rippling in the breeze. I thought of my old self, the one who'd measured her worth by approvals and promotions. She'd been so afraid of falling short, so quick to bend under pressure. I didn't hate her anymore. She'd done her best, and she'd brought me here to this bench, this moment. I flipped to a blank page, my pen hovering. I wrote about the keychain, the star-shaped one someone had sent after I quit. I kept it in my pocket now, a small weight that grounded me. It wasn't about who sent it, Hannah, Marcus, or someone else. It was about what it meant. I'd been seen even when I felt invisible. That knowledge settled in me, warm and sure, like a stone smoothed by a river. My phone buzzed, a text from my new boss about a project I'd pitched. "Great ideas, Audrey. Let's run with them." I smiled, tucking the phone away. The praise felt different here, earned in a place that valued my voice. I closed my journal, the pages heavy with my truth, and leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. I wasn't whole yet, but I was closer, each word and breath stitching me back together. Leslie's kitchen was warm, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air as we chopped vegetables side by side. Her toddler Mia scribbled at the table, her crayons rolling across a sheet of paper. The clink of knives and Mia's soft humming wrapped around me, a cocoon of ordinary moments that felt sacred after everything. I'd come for dinner, but it was more than that, a chance to anchor myself in something real, something that didn't demand I prove my worth. Leslie tossed a handful of carrots into a pan, her movements quick but easy. "You seem different tonight," she said, glancing at me. Her voice was casual, but her eyes held a question. I paused, my knife still over a stalk of celery, and considered her words. Different. I'd felt it too in the park, in the way my thoughts had settled like dust after a storm. I wasn't the woman who'd cried in her car, nor the one who'd typed that letter in a fury. I was someone new, still forming. "I think I'm learning to let go," I said, my voice soft. I set the knife down, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Not just of the job or Raymond or Jocelyn, but of the need to be enough for everyone. Leslie nodded, her smile small but knowing. She'd seen me at my lowest, raging against the unfairness, and now she saw this shift, quiet but real. Mia looked up, holding out her drawing. "For you, Auntie Audrey," she said, her voice bright. I took the paper, a messy burst of colors with a stick figure in the middle labeled Brave. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from something warmer, deeper. I knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "I love it." She beamed, returning to her crayons, unaware of how her small gift had cracked me open. I pinned the drawing to Leslie's fridge, its edges curling slightly. It wasn't just a child's sketch. It was a mirror reflecting the courage I'd found, not in loud moments, but in the quiet ones like this. I thought of the star keychain in my pocket, the journal I'd filled, the intern I'd guided. Each was a step toward a life I was choosing, not one I was fighting to earn. Leslie stirred the pan, the sizzle grounding us. She said her tone thoughtful. When I quit my job back then, I thought I'd failed. But it wasn't failure. It was freedom. She looked at me, her eyes steady. You're free now, Audrey. What are you going to do with it? The question lingered, simple but vast. I didn't have an answer, not fully, but I felt its possibility. I picked up the knife again, slicing the celery with slow, deliberate cuts. I'm figuring it out, I said, and the words felt true. I wasn't chasing approval anymore, or justice, or revenge. I was just living moment by moment, and that was enough for now. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from my new boss. Your project outline is stellar. Let's meet Monday to dive in. I read it twice, a quiet pride settling in my chest. This job wasn't a fix for the past, but a door to something mine. I slipped the phone into my pocket, turning back to Leslie. She raised her glass of water, a mock toast, and I laughed, the sound light, unforced. Mia started singing a made-up tune about stars and trees, and we let her voice fill the room. The kitchen glowed, the light soft against the windows, and I stood there surrounded by love and ordinary grace. I was still healing, still learning, but I was here whole in this moment. I closed my eyes just for a second and let the world be still. 6 months had passed, and my new office felt like a place I belonged. My desk was cluttered with sticky notes and coffee mugs, each a small proof of a life I was building. I leaned back in my chair, the morning light filtering through the window, catching the edges of a framed photo of Leslie and Mia. I'd started this job nervous, unsure if I could trust again, but now as I typed up a report, my fingers moved with a quiet confidence. I'd taken to mentoring a young colleague, Nora, who reminded me of myself at 22, eager but afraid of failing. Yesterday she'd come to me with a question about a client pitch, her voice hesitant. I'd listened, offered ideas, and watched her eyes light up as she jotted them down. Guiding her felt like tending a garden, each small growth a victory. It wasn't about fixing my past. It was about planting something new, something that could last. The news had quieted about my old company, but a headline last week caught my eye. Raymond was gone, let go after the board's review. The company was restructuring, promising fairer practices. I'd read the article at my kitchen counter, my tea going cold, and felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, just a soft relief, like closing a book I'd outgrown. That chapter was done, and I didn't need to reread it. I stood and walked to the office's common area, where a bulletin board held team updates. I pinned up a flyer for a workshop I was leading, my name bold at the bottom. 6 months ago, I'd have flinched at seeing it there, afraid of being too visible. Now I stepped back, my hands in my pockets, and let myself feel the weight of my own presence. I was here doing work I believed in, and that was enough. My lunch break took me to the street outside, where food trucks lined the curb. I bought a taco and sat on a nearby bench watching people pass, office workers, students, a man walking his dog. The city moved around me, alive and indifferent, and I felt part of it, not separate. I thought of Nora, how she'd thanked me this morning, her smile shy but genuine. Her gratitude had stirred something, a reminder that my worth wasn't tied to titles or applause, but to the moments I showed up for someone else. I finished my taco, crumpling the wrapper, and pulled a small sketchbook from my bag. I'd started drawing again, a habit I'd abandoned years ago under the grind of my old job. The pages held quick sketches, street scenes, coffee cups, Mia's laughter captured in bold lines. It wasn't art for anyone else, just a way to see the world clearly. I flipped to a blank page, my pencil hovering, and started tracing the outline of a tree across the street, its branches stark against the sky. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Heard the news about Raymond. You good? I typed back a quick, all good, and meant it. Marcus had stayed in touch, his updates less frequent, but always warm. He and Hannah were my anchors through the storm, and though we rarely spoke of it now, their belief in me had carried me here. I slipped the phone away, my pencil moving again, the tree taking shape. The office called me back, but I lingered a moment, the sketchbook open in my lap. The tree's lines were uneven, imperfect, but they were mine. I closed the book, my fingers brushing the cover, and stood, the city's hum soft in my ears. I was ready to keep going, not because I had to prove anything, but because I wanted to see what came next. That evening I drove to my old office one last time. The building looked smaller under the dusk sky, its windows dark, the parking lot nearly empty. I wasn't here to confront anyone or reclaim anything. I'd come to let go, to close a door I'd left ajar. In my bag was my old project notebook, its pages worn from years of ideas, plans, dreams I'd poured into a place that hadn't seen me. I didn't need it anymore, but someone else might. I walked into the lobby, the security guard nodding as I passed. The break room was quiet, the hum of the fridge the only sound. I opened the notebook, flipping through sketches of workflows, notes from meetings, moments of hope I'd long forgotten. On the last page I wrote a single line: "Your work matters. Keep going." I tore it out and pinned it to the bulletin board next to faded flyers and lunch menus. The notebook I left on the table, a gift for whoever found it, a new hire. Maybe someone still finding their way. I stepped back, my hands in my coat pockets, and looked around. This room had held so much gossip, betrayal, my own unraveling. But it wasn't my story anymore. I walked out, the cool night air brushing my face, and didn't look back. The drive home was calm, the radio off, my thoughts clear. I'd spent so long fighting to be seen, to prove I was enough. Now I was learning to see myself, and that was a different kind of freedom. The lesson came to me slowly over months of small steps. It wasn't about winning or being right. It was about choosing myself, even when it hurt, even when it meant walking away. I'd been broken open by betrayal, but in the cracks, I'd found strength, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that let me show up for Nora, for Leslie, for the work I loved. I'd learned that courage isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's a whisper, a choice to keep going when the world tells you to shrink. I thought of the people who'd carried me: Leslie's fierce love, Marcus's steady faith, Nora's quiet trust. They'd shown me that healing isn't a finish line. It's a practice, a daily act of grace. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. I was enough, not because of what I did, but because of who I was choosing to be: someone who could forgive, who could build, who could start again. What's the moment that made you choose yourself? I'd love to hear your story in the comments, to know what's helped you find your way through the hard days. If this resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to join me for more, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying your own light. Here's to healing, to growing, to all the quiet victories ahead.